trashi pa tuche tempe chinle yarngoda pelge drolor zampe zeparche panden lame shabla solwade Omo a guru vajradara suma timunisha sane karm Utta vardanya shri badra varsa manya sarva siddhi hum Omo a guru vajradara suma timunish Utta vardanya shri badra varsa manya sarva siddhi hum Om Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha San Uta Vardanya Shri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradara Sumati Munisha Uta Vardanya Shri Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Pakyuke kudan dagi alu pakyuke sungdan dagi nga pakyuke tukdan dagi yi tenyerme chiktu chingi alu makyuke kudan dagi lu Ma kyuke sungdan dage nga Ma kyuke tukdan dage yi ten yerme chiktu chingelo Om Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakyamuni Swaha Sashi Puki Chukshi Medo Trama Rirab Lingshi Nide Gembadi Sangye Shindu Mikde Ulvargi Drogu Namda Shingla Che Parashu Yedam Guru Ratna Mindra Lakham Niryatayami Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsuchi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchra Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapsuchi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchra Sangye Drupar Sho Sangye Chedan Tsoge Chonam La Jancho Pardo Dani Kyapsuchi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchra Sangye Drupar Sho Nel Buddha, nel Dharma e nel
In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. through the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
Namo yal haye ke dal hudan ne jin ke rubun dan da mi ke nam dan roba kwen ke ranam che tsampa tham che ke to da ke che ten ta. Buongiorno.
Good morning.
Quando Buddha Shakyamuni,
When Buddha Shakyamuni, that started the so-called Buddhism, and I say so-called because when we go look at the term Buddhism, it's quite new. It's a terminology that was born with the Western world, I think.
Per essere preciso, non saprei dirvi
I
esattamente in
would
quale
not know
momento chi l'ha inventato.
in the specific moment that was invented, but if we ask ourselves if Buddha was Buddhist, probably no. At the same way, if we said that Jesus Christ was Christian. So it depends on the definition that we give to Buddhist and Christian, etc., etc. But Buddha was not Buddhist in the sense of being part of a religious institution called Buddhism. Buddha was a person, a prince.
Quindi se noi pensiamo un po' ai nostri tempi
And if we think of the modern times, if we think of someone that was born in a context of a lot of riches, a person that could have anything that he or she wanted, that had a lot of riches and kind of spoiled, let's say, because Buddha was a prince, so the father was afraid that he could get out of this riches, and so for this reason he kind of protected him from suffering.
E cercare una soluzione per venire fuori, no? Finché uno rimane
So until someone stays, let's say, trapped in the pleasures and power and these illusions of happiness, let's say, it's difficult for a person to open him or herself to other solutions. So for this reason, Buddha's father found many ways to spoil his kid with palaces for the summer, for the winter, in order to entertain him in many ways. But at a certain point, Buddha had some encounters, and these encounters made him reflect a lot. Because, first of all, he started to ask himself, why my father isn't letting me out of the palace alone? So what is it out there that I cannot see? And at a certain point, as it happens with a lot of teenage people, that they need to be rebels in some way and need to find themselves beyond the identity of the parents, he insists and he make himself accompany outside of the palace. And if you can see in these pictures, there is this picture with the Buddha, and there are some other pictures at the fifth. There is this image here in the temple, the person that is taking like a horse. This
lo stagliere di Buddha.
This was the
che porta dietro lì c'è Buddha, quello è rappresentato.
the stable hand of Buddha.
E lì viene rappresentato in quel caso
And he was represented here, this stable hand of Buddha, because it was said that it was the previous life of Lama Ganchen. And in the other paintings that are here in the temple
sono tutte le varie
are all the previous lives of Kyabche Trichan Dorje Chan, the teacher of Lama Ganchen. This is just a curiosity that came out here. But what happened is the stable hand helped Buddha to get out of the castle, of the palace. He goes outside and encounters many people. And in the end, his stable hand became his friend as well and told him the truth, told him things as they were. So they were friends, they knew each other since Siddhartha Buddha was very young. And once they were outside, he had many encounters. And there was a time where he saw someone that was very ill. Another time he saw a person that was very old. And another time he saw a person that just died. And when he went back to the palace, he says, but with all this power and these riches and these pleasures, even if you try to make me avoid suffering, and in the end, both you and I will get sick. Right? And his father said, yes. Will we get old? And the father replied, yes, if you don't die before, but will we have to die? Yes. So what is all this riches and power? What are they for? There needs to be a different way. The fourth encounter that touched deeply Buddha was when he saw this person, a man, that abandoned completely his mundane objectives of power, of position, role, and to look for an alternative solution for getting out of suffering, and it was a spiritual path. And so he said, oh, so there is another way. And he started to get interested in this. And at a certain point, he got married, he had a child, Rahula, and he said, I don't want to leave my child and the world in this state. There needs to be a way out. And what made Buddha look for this path is a characteristic that usually is not talked a lot about, but it personally touches me a lot. Buddha, when he was not known as Buddha yet, he was not afraid to suffer. Because often we say, yes, riches don't bring happiness, but life is easier if we have money. It's true if power and riches and pleasures will not bring to happiness, but if we have them, it's better, right? So we try to live our life at the best of our abilities. We try to live comfortably, trying to avoid sufferings and having as much pleasures as possible. And in some way, life goes on. And then someone can say, yes, you cannot suffer this life. You cannot overcome suffering in this life, but you can reach it after life. There are different ways. But Buddha said, no, I don't quite believe in this. There has to be a way to reach happiness here and now, to get out of this suffering. And it's here that Buddha started his research. So he started from this aspect of not resignation to suffering. And it's not something that was only about himself, but it was also about his family, the people he knew, and everybody else. Because sometimes people say, but look, he had a child and he abandoned his kid. But actually his child became one of the first monks, and the wife became one of the first nuns. But anyways, what happened is that at a certain point, Buddha dedicated 6 years to this research. spiritual research, looking for doing an inner research to understand what were the causes of suffering. Where does suffering come from? And to summarize it, Buddha arrives to the conclusion that suffering is not caused by external conditions, and not even by sickness or aging or death, but suffering was caused by our ignorance, our egoism, our anger, attachment, hate, insatisfaction, etc. And from the actions that are acted upon these emotions. And so his research was, I need to overcome these inner states of unbalance in order to live life in a more balanced and peaceful way. And this is what happened. So when we say that Buddha reached enlightenment, the term in Tibetan Sangye means to have eliminated the inner conflicts, inner states that generate suffering, and generating the qualities like love, compassion, wisdom, concentration to the maximum level possible. This is what is the definition of a Buddha. But what is important for us today is not the story of Buddha, who he was and what he did, but what Buddha left to us and if it's useful or not. The objective, not mine or I don't think even yours, is not to be Buddhist. The point is not to be a Buddhist. The point is to see, okay, what Buddha transmitted, what Buddha left us from generation to generation. Some say that past 2,500 years, 2,800 years, doesn't really matter. The point is a lot of centuries passed and something arrived to us. And what arrived until us, does it work or no? This, for me, is one of the most important points. And when we go and see Buddhism in general, what we call of Buddhism, which the original term, it's actually two terms. One is Buddha Dharma, which are the teachings of the spiritual path transmitted by Buddha, which this is Buddha Dharma, and the other is
or Nangche.
Nanche in Tibetan. So Che Dharma is the teachings, is phenomena, reality, but in this case is talking about a spiritual path. Nang means internal, so the internal spiritual path. So this is the principal terminology to define Buddhism originally. So this path is divided into three aspects. Not only Buddhism, but actually I think all religions. We have a vision of life, what is the way of relating to reality, so how to answer to some fundamental questions, who I am, what is reality, what happens after death, why this is this, why that is that. There are a lot of questions. Where does suffering come from? What we have to do in order to be happy? Is it possible or not? These are a lot of questions to which we give answers that create a corpus, that create this vision of life, of world. Then we have the part that is called the conduct, the rules of conduct. So what is good to pursue and what is not good to pursue. So what is the lifestyle that is coherent with this worldview? And then we have the different techniques in order to develop these characteristics in order to be coherent with that worldview. Meditation, praying, sacred art, like today we're doing the Yamantaka Mandala. There are infinite things. So today, the point that we will touch is principally about the first part, so the worldview. And what happened is that when Buddha died, his disciples reunited from different parts of the world, and there we had some difficulty, let's say, that when the disciples reunited, they started to share what Buddha taught them. And one said, Buddha taught me this, and the other said, but actually he taught me this other thing. Things that almost seemed contradictory. Fortunately, they didn't start to fight. Fortunately, nobody said, I am the holder of the truth. But what is told is nobody had this kind of attitude. They said, actually, I am the owner of my truth, and you are the owner of your truth. So what happened is, Buddha taught me this, I will follow this. Buddha taught you that, so you will follow that. And so from here, different Buddhist schools were created, were formed. They were not, of course, called Buddhist schools, but originally they were four. In Sanskrit, Vaipasika, Sautantrika, Chittamatra, and Madhyamika. But anyways, the first one is divided into 18, because were 18 different places where Buddha gave similar teachings, but slightly different. For example, the monastic votes. To someone, Buddha said, the monastic votes are for life. To other, he said, the votes are for a determined period of time, for example, years or months or days. And so the point was, what's the correct thing to do? But actually, both are correct. The point is that they needed to be adapted to the context, the cultural context, to where they were taught. So these different... So the Theravada from these 18 different schools is the one that, let's say, is more known, and someone maybe know it in Thailand. So Theravada is the name of one of these 18 schools, of the first school of the four that we said before. But anyways, there were many schools, and they said, okay, but what is the common thread that links us together? Because we have different point of views on some things. For example, some schools said that the past doesn't exist, the future doesn't exist, and only the present exists. Some others said the past exists, but is permanent. Some say, no, actually the past exists, but is impermanent. And it's beautiful because you can debate and you can see different perspectives to arrive to a conclusion that is more coherent. And when you study different schools altogether, they become like kind of steps of one same ladder. But this is not the topic of today. The point is that at a certain point, there was this question, what is the common thread that links us together? And there, they found these 4 sigils, 4 points that were coherent within all these schools. So they are coherent with the Buddha's teachings. So all these different schools that then developed in different parts of the world, in Southeast Asia, in Tibet, in Vietnam, in Japan, and have different ramifications in the West today as well, but the common points, what are? Philosophically speaking, based on the first point, so of the worldview, there are 4 points that are common to all. And I would like to talk about them today, not from an academic, philosophic point of view, in order to study different schools, but in order to understand what are the 4 columns of the worldview that Buddha shared with us. Because in the end, what Buddha said is, look, if you are able to see these 4 things in this way, this is the basis upon which you can get out of the suffering. So let's see these 4 points. And then each of you can see if it's coherent for you or not, and if you can apply it on your everyday life, in your everyday life. Let's start from the first.
Vengono chiamati in tibetano Tawakata Gicchagyashi.
In Tibetan, they are called like this, these 4 sigils. of the Buddhist worldview.
Duche tamche mitakpa sakche tamche dungawa che tamche tonshida mebe nyangele debe shiwa. Il primo dice
The first says
duce tamche mitakpa. Tutti i fenomeni composti sono
all composed phenomena are impermanent. Everything that is impure is of the nature of suffering. Every phenomena are empty and don't have an intrinsic existence. And beyond suffering, you can find peace. It's much easier than it seems, actually. Let's start from the first. That is the basis. Every composed phenomena are impermanent. What does it mean?
Credo che sia, ovviamente, più che credo, sono sicuro che è già capitato a tutti.
I think that it already happened to all of you
Che quando viviamo qualcosa chiediamo il perché.
that when we live something, we kind of ask ourselves why. Why this is happening, why that is this, why that is that. When we live a situation, one of the first things we ask ourselves is why.
Una volta ero con
Once I was with a friend in Brazil, and he was
3-4 giorni prima aveva
like 3-4 days earlier, he had an accident with an airplane with all his family. They were in Brazil. He went for work in a place, and they had to fly over the Amazon, and there was a malfunction in the airplane, and it had to land in emergency.
Solo che erano in mezzo alla foresta.
And they were in the middle of the forest, so it was very dangerous. But at the end, in the middle of the Amazon, they found this vast and open place without trees, and they were able to land there. And when the plane was falling down, it touched the ground. It did not come to a full stop, but there was kind of a small hill, and it jumped, and there were a lot of cows under that. And with that jump, the airplane kind of skipped these cows and then landed safely. So in the end, someone broke something, but some ribs maybe, but not much. So everybody kind of was safe after that. And when I went to meet him, he asked me, "Look, Lama, in this period, a lot of people," because he was kind of an important person, so a lot of people came to me and said, "Look, you are alive because God didn't want you to die, because there is no other explanation for this miracle." And he asked me, "And what's the point of view from a Buddhist perspective?" I reflected a bit. I didn't quite think about it in this way, but what came to my mind is the reason why the airplane fell down and you did not hurt yourself, like really hurt yourself, is the same reason why when you take your car to go to the office, you arrive safely without accidents. And he said, "Okay, can you explain, please?" Causes and conditions. But when things happen as we expect, everything is normal. But when something happens in a way that we do not expect and we cannot understand, the complex interaction of causes and conditions, and it's something not good, we say it's a conviction. But when something then good happens that we did not expect, is kind of a miracle. But actually what happened is it's a very complex equation of things happened in the past that add themselves with current situations and conditions, present conditions, and this is how things happen. There is a movie that explains this quite well. The movie is called The Story of Benjamin Button. And there is a specific scene in this movie that explains this quite well. And there is the scene is this person that wakes up quite late, and then the car stops because someone passes, and anyways, there are a lot of events that happen, and in the end, this girl gets out of a theater, and that car gets her, and so an accident happens. So it was just a series of conditions that made this accident happen. And if we look at the present moment, the present is as it is because there is an infinity of causes. So causes are what happened in the past, and conditions is what is happening in the present that interact between them and create the present moment as we are living it.
Basta che noi ci chiediamo quante cose
we could ask ourselves, how many things happened in order for us to be here today? If Lama Michel Rinpoche did not come to Italy, would be here today? In Italy, would be here today? No. If he did not go to Brazil, would I be here today? No. And we could go on and on and on and on about these things. So everything that happened, it's for example, at a certain point, a couple of Italians, Monica and Claudio, friends, went to Brazil through a friend, Professor Shahed, and went to my mother's 30th birthday and said, look, we want to bring this Lama to Brazil. We met him in India. And this friend said to my mother, you are the perfect person in order to help out for this trip. And she looked at a picture of Lama Michel Rinpoche and said, okay, I can help. Let's do it. If this professor did not say, no, I will not help you. Or my mother said, no, yes, looking at the picture, look, yes, when he arrives, maybe I can meet him, but I cannot help with the organization of all of this. Probably we would not all be here. At least I would not be here. So there are words said, thoughts thought, actions made, that if it were not for that specific moment, we would not be here. And this is for everybody. So nothing comes from nothing, and nothing ends up in nothing. Every word said, every action we make, every encounter we had, every thought we had, it's not that it's important in defining our life. It's determining our life. Let's imagine that at a certain point here we choose to make an equation altogether. So everyone think of a number. And think if you want to multiply, subtract, add, or divide with this number. We will not really actually do it now because it would be too long, but let's say that we write down this equation, asking to each one of us what was your number and if you wanted to add, multiply, etc. And we decide an order in which to put the numbers, because otherwise it would change, no? So changing the order of the numbers, the result would change. So let's say that we determine an order into which putting the numbers, and we arrive to a result. And let's say it's a random number, 38. And I say, but I don't like 38. Who is the responsible for this? Who chose the wrong number that brought us to have this result? Could I point fingers to that person saying, if you would have chose another number, the result would have been different? Yes or no? But if I chose a different number, the result would have been different. So I could point fingers. But you are not responsible in the sense that we are all responsible, but we cannot say that there is one specific person that is guilty for this for this result, because we are all responsible. So the present moment is this, is the result of an extremely complex equation. But the numbers present in this are the encounters, the thoughts, the emotions, the actions of an infinity of people and beings that interact. Because there are also all the microorganisms that are inside of us that are part of this. Because if they decide to act and work in a different way, we would not be here sitting down easily right now. We would rush to the toilet, for example. So also they can also interact in a way that can change our emotions and humor. And just to open a parenthesis, is in 1987, Lama Michel Rinpoche made his first public conference in Brazil, and it was in Clube Pinheiros, and the topic that he talked about was the importance of making peace with the microorganisms that live within us. This in 87. But anyways, let's close this parenthesis. Anyways, what happens is that in the present moment, we are in this complex equation. And within this complex equation, there is another fundamental rule. Wherever we have interaction, inevitably we have transformation. It's not possible to have an interaction that doesn't bring to a transformation. So in the moment that we talk to each other, we see each other, we touch each other, we interact through thoughts and in any way, it's not only from one side. In the moment that two entities interact, they both transform. So everything that we see, we touch, we feel, that interacts, inevitably are in transformation, because constantly they interact. So if the interaction changes, reality changes. It's like when someone says, look, this person is not being truthful with me, because when this person is with someone else, the person is different. Of course, the interaction changes, so the person changes. What would be different is someone that stays completely the same in every kind of situation. It's impossible. Another thing, if someone is trying to be fake, a fake person, but that's another topic. So the point is, depending on where we are, with which person we are, and the context we are in, we transform and we change. So because we constantly live in interaction, and this being in constant interaction, and the philosophic term is everything that is produced, in Tibetan duce, what exists as the result of other things that sum together. When we look at our being, we live in a complex interdependence. We depend on many different factors in order to be who we are today. For example, when we breathe, what does this depend on?
Basta respirare o ci deve essere l'ossigeno, no? Questo ossigeno da dove?
Do we need oxygen in order to breathe? Where does this oxygen come from? A part of it comes from trees, but it's said that more of 50% of the oxygen we breathe comes from the ocean, from these microplants that are in the ocean, that are so many that when you take satellite pictures, you can actually see them, because there are so many from a distance, but if you actually go closely, you cannot see them. And they produce photosynthesis in the sea, and they produce over 50% of our oxygen. And so we strongly depend from these plants, but they could not exist if not for some factors. One is the Sahara Desert, and everyone says, actually, the lung of the world is the Amazon, but actually, without the desert, the Amazon would not exist. All these microplants in the ocean would not exist, because in the Sahara Desert, there is a specific part where the desert is made of these particles, this sand that is so rich of minerals, and there are some conditions that, thanks to the wind, a lot of this sand goes to the ocean, and part of it goes in the ocean, and part of it goes to the Amazon. And this is what fertilizes the Amazon and fertilizes these plants in the ocean. So if the Sahara Desert would not exist, we would not be able to breathe well. And then there's also the whales. Whales are one of the most important fertilizers of the ocean, because the whales are big, they eat a lot, and consequently shits a lot. So what happens is, when the whale needs to digest, let's say, she doesn't stay still. She moves and goes up and down, moving kilometers. And while she's swimming, she's fertilizing. And this is one of the main fertilizers of these plants in the ocean. So if whales did not exist, we would not have the same amount of oxygen to breathe. So when we look at this, the simple fact that we are able to breathe depends on so many different factors that we are not even aware of. And these factors are within themselves a huge complex equation. So and if we look at it, actually it's kind of crazy, because what fertilizes the ocean and then the Amazon is, from what I understood, is that where the Sahara Desert is, before it was actually the sea. And these planktons, these plants, when they die, they end up at the bottom of the ocean, and so what now fertilizes the ocean are actually these plants that were there in the sea, that now has become the desert and then comes back to the ocean. So it's a very complex equation made of even more complex equations. All of this is to say that the present moment is not something that we can take for granted, but at the same time we are beings, not only us, this microphone that I'm using, this sound of the bell, my dog Dana in front of me, everything that exists as a composed phenomena, in the sense that it's a result of a complexity of causes and conditions, interactions of a lot of parts. And each part of these interaction at the same time is the result of another complex web of causes and conditions. If we use the analogy of the equation, everything is the result of a complex equation, and every part of the complex equation is the result of another complex equation. So the point is that the most important thing to understand here is that each part of the equation changes the final result. Sometimes we don't even realize this, because we look at the full number and we don't look at the decimals, but actually all these decimals are very important, that bring to huge changes. So the point is, every composed phenomena is impermanent, means everything that exists in a dependence of causes and conditions, etc., inevitably is constantly in transformation. For example, ourselves. And here there is a fundamental point. What does it mean that we are constantly in transformation? Not only that things don't stay as we look at them, but there's also the question, in which direction is it transforming and why is it transforming this way? And here there is the power of interaction. And in all this equation there is an important point, which is consciousness, because there is a difference between a sentient being and a living being. We are both sentient and living being. There are some beings that are living but not sentient beings. For example, a rock. If we look at a rock, does it interact with the world around itself? Yes. Is there a birth and death of a rock? When we go to the beach, sand is kind of the reincarnation of a rock. It transformed into something else. I remember one time we were in Tibet, and Pete, this friend of ours, was showing us that from the mountain, slowly, pieces of rock were falling down and going into the river, and slowly in the river were making it, making them flow into the sea, slowly, and then in the sea, they were accumulating, becoming lava, and then coming out as volcanoes. And so this was the kind of reincarnation of the mountain. So anyways, there is a cycle in everything, but living being is something that interacts, that has a process of birth, life, and death. Also, plants, for example, are considered living beings, but they exist on the basis of mechanical rules, let's say. In the sense, if you interact in the same way, the result is the same. So this is why it's much easier to relate to a plant rather than a person, because I don't think that when you go to a plant giving some water, the plant would reply, I don't like your face today, I don't want to grow today. You arrived a bit late, I'm mad at you right now. So the plant is, you act in the same way and you have the same results. With a human being, does it happen the same way? No, because we have this conscience, or we have this part where we interpret the world and we relate to it not through mechanical reactions, but through our own interpretation of our reality. Then there is a physical and mechanical part of our being. Of course, physically there is, but we have this that it's called this conscience, that is the basis of our freedom to choose what to do. So the free will, we have this freedom, and it's here that, based on our thoughts, we choose to interact in a way rather than another. So in this equation that we are part of, one of the most important factors is our conscience, in which we direct the result in a way or another. So in the first sigil, the fundamental point is everything happens as a result of a complex interaction, causes and conditions. The present is result of the past. But it means that also that the future is a result of the present summed to the past. Okay? What does this mean? It means that in the moment we have conscience, I can in the present interact in a way or in another, and by doing this, I can change my future and my present. So what will happen is not predetermined. Doesn't depend from others, but depends from myself, from my actions, my choices. And every interaction that can be with the physical world, verbal interactions, what I emanate to the world from the point of view of the sound, also with our thoughts. When I emanate in this way, this is called the word, and then we have the interactions of the mind. Every thought, emotion, judgment influences the other. I will make an example. Let's say in this moment, I start talking badly about a person. Let's say Devadatta. We always use Devadatta as example. In Italian, we say Tizio Caio. In the Buddhist tradition, we say Devadatta, which was Buddha's cousin that tried to kill Buddha 5 times. He was very envious, etc. Anyways, for some reason, we use Devadatta as an example. So, let's say that at a certain point, I start talking badly about Devadatta. Look, Devadatta is someone you cannot trust. He's a bad person. You should stay away from him. Like, I take 30 seconds to speak very poorly about him. In 20 years, you meet Devadatta. This encounter will be influenced by what you heard from me or no. But it was just a word, 30 seconds. But of course this will influence a thought, that then will influence the word, the speech, that will influence the actions, that will influence everything else. So every thought that we have interacts. Every word we speak interacts, every choice we make. One influences the other. Okay? So we live in this complex web of interactions, and when we have interactions, we have transformations. And in the equation of our own life, the main part of this equation is ourselves. Because when we talk about our individual equation, is actually composed by 2 principal aspects that are causes and conditions. Causes are all the things I did with body, speech, and mind in the past, people I met in the past, the thoughts I had, situation I lived. So everything I lived, I thought up until now, are the causes that I created. In the present moment, my physical state, my mental state in the present are the internal conditions, and what happens outside of myself with which I interact are the external conditions. We sum internal and external conditions, and the cause is created, and the present experience is created. Okay? So, if I want to have a different future, I need to create different causes. If I want to change my present, causes are already created, but I can work on the conditions. That is the physical and mental state of the present. So, because conditions are also causes for the future, are the conditions of the present, but the causes of the future. But I don't want to enter into a technical aspect. The point is why things are as they are. Let's look at the world that is around us. Let's take the war, for example, no?
Perché c'è la guerra?
Why is there war right now? Let's take one of the many, unfortunately, that we have. Because of a very complex web of interactions. It's not something that happened, that was created yesterday. It's years and years and years of choices, of things. And if we look at what's happening in the Middle East, is the result in part of what happened at the end of the
Dove l'inglese e i francesi hanno scelto di dividere i vari paesi a un certo
of the Ottoman Empire, where they took Israel and said it would be a neutral land, etc., etc. It was 1917, those years. And still now we are living consequences of that. It's not the only cause, but it was a part of it. So everything is a result of a complex interaction. Beauty, the beauty of it is that every action we make in the present is a change in the equation. And when we change something in the equation, the result inevitably is different. If I want to have a specific result, I need to create those causes. If I want to avoid a result, I need to avoid those causes. For example, do we all want to have a healthy body? I think so, right? If I want to have a healthy body, let's say my grandfather, he was 100 years old and he had a kind of a healthy body, and it was like, oh, it's nice to arrive to at this age with such a healthy body. But did it just happen, or did he take care of it every day before that age? I remember he was 98 years old and he took 1 kilo in his arm to exercise. He was exercising also for his short time memory, and he was able to arrive at 100 years old very present with a healthy mind and a healthy body. Why? Because he was able to cultivate this in his life. What is the level of coherence if you say, I want to have a healthy body, but I eat very poorly and I live in a state of chronic stress, and then I say, I want to have a healthy body? It's not very coherent. So if I want to have a healthy body, I need today to cultivate the causes. So it's the part of that equation in order to arrive to that result. The way that I eat, that I sleep, the level of stress that I have, etc., etc. In other words, this is what we call the law of cause and effect. The law of action, causes, and results. Meaning, everything that exists is a result of this complex web of interaction, where every sentient being interacts. And this is what is called the law of karma. And here what happens is that when the Buddhist teachings arrived to us, some terms were translated in the Western language and some other terms were kept in Sanskrit. And I think that some terminologies that would have been better to keep the Sanskrit have been translated, and vice versa. And so slowly we need to see this a bit again, because one of the original terms that where a translation exists is karma, that literally means action. So the law of karma is the law of action, causes, and results. And if in our mind, it's very different to say this or to say karma, because karma is kind of a mystic thing we don't really know about. So we can get confused and we can say, oh, look at this, look how I have such a good karma when a good things happen, or if something bad happens, is always the fault is always of someone else. But anyways, karma means action. So the first sigil, the first column, is everything exists as it is, as a complex interaction of causes and condition, and every action brings to a result that is coherent with the action made. So if we look at a present moment and we want to look at the causes that brought us to this result, we are not able to do this because there is a mistake, a common mistake, that we are looking for the guilty person or thing, the guilty cause. And I look for the guilty of the results that we previously said of the number 38, because we are all responsible. So similarly, if we ask ourselves why this happened to me, we would like answers that simplify our lives, that are simple answers, that are linear. If we find the guilty, then we are happy. But actually, the answer is much more complex than we can imagine and goes much beyond our level of comprehension. So when we ask ourselves why this happened, if we want one principal cause, the result, the answer is actually the wrong question. We don't have the cause, the single cause of a result. The correct question is which are the causes of a result and the actions of a certain result. So the first sigil is, it's possible to transform ourselves in a way or another based on the interactions that we create. I am sick, I want to be healthy. Sickness is, if I change my lifestyle, I can become healthy. If I have a healthy body and I have a sick lifestyle, then I will get sick. So this is kind of straightforward, right? So our current state, in our current moment, our happiness is not the result of something that does not depend on us. So our happiness is the result of the complex equation of our life through which we experience these results through our sensations. So, I want something, I need to create causes and conditions in order for this to happen. This is the first point. I think this is kind of clear, right? What changes in our life if we can take this vision of life? First of all, we stop being victims, because our tendency is to victimize ourselves. This is like this because when I was younger, when I was a baby, I had this trauma because this person did this and that person did that. So this is one part of the extremely complex equation. But if I want to be, if I want it to be different, it's in my hands. And this is one of the first acts of courage for our spiritual path, that is to stop victimizing ourselves. Taking in our hands the reins of our life. And when we put it into practice, this first sigil, what happens is I want a healthy state of both my mind and body, and I want to be in harmony with others. I want to have good relations with others. I want to be peaceful with myself and others. I want this, so I need to create the causes for this. And what this means is I recognize what is good for me and what brings me to this state of peace and health and joy, and I need to cultivate it. I recognize what is not good for me, and I need to abandon it. And here we find ourselves in front of one of the first challenges, that is to cultivate what is good for us even when we don't like it, and abandon what is not good for us even when we like it. And this doesn't mean we have to make sacrifices. For example, in my case, talking about something that is quite easy to understand. So I have some issues, for example, having intolerances with lactose. I'm lactose intolerant. So I really like mozzarella, and I cannot eat it. So when I see it in front of me, it's not a sacrifice not to eat it. It's actually an act of love towards myself. I love myself. I don't want to live in a constant state of inflammation, that summing it in time can bring me to an anaphylactic shock. I don't want to arrive to this. So because I love myself, I'm not eating what is not good for me, even if I like it. Because I love myself, I try to cultivate what's good for me and abandon what is not good for me. Because I want to be happy and healthy, so I need to create today the causes in order to be healthy. I want to have a healthy relation with someone. Think of your relationships. For example, your parents, your kids, your partners. Do we want to have a relationship that is based on gratitude, on friendship, on faith? So this means that today I need to act in this direction in order to have a relationship that is always more and more based on that. But if I interact with anger, envy, and indifference, what I'm cultivating is that kind of relationship. So the first sigil is quite simple. The future is a result of the present, and the present is a result of the past. Let's take care of the present in order to have those results in the future. So let's stop victimizing ourselves, and let's take back the reins of our lives now in order to have the results we want in the future. And also another point is the closest point to arrive to any place is where I am today, where I find myself today. Let's say that I say, I want to go from here to Assisi by foot. Beautiful. But if I found myself, if I were already in Averna, it would be easier. Of course, but where am I right now? In Albagnano. But if I say to myself, I cannot start from here because it would have been easier starting from there, I will never start walking. So the point is, there's no other place that is closest to the place that I want to arrive to rather than the place that we find ourselves right now. Then the quickest path is the one that I'm able to do. Let's imagine that we want to climb a mountain, and I arrive at the basis of the mountain, and there is a huge cliff of the mountain. And let's say that by climbing it in 1 or 2 days, we would reach the top. Or there is an easy path that goes around the mountain that will take a couple of weeks or something like that. So in 2 weeks you would reach the top with a simple path. So I arrive there and I ask myself, which is the quickest path? We would say climbing the mountain. But it depends by who. Because for me, for example, it's easier to walk, because if I try to climb, I would fall down after a while. I would break every bone. I would have to do a rehabilitation, and maybe years would pass before climbing again. Of course, if someone else is already used to climbing, then it would be easier to climb. But if we're not used to climbing, it's quicker to walk. Or I choose to go to learn how to climb and this and that, and so after a couple of years I'm ready to climb, and then in 1 or 2 days I arrive there. But if I started walking, in 2 weeks I would have reached that. So the quickest path is the one that I'm able to do. So we need to start from where we are today and who we are today. And this brings us to a point that is important, that is, I need to welcome and embrace myself. I don't need to impose to myself to be who I am not. So I need to direct myself with determination to whom I want to become. So I want to be a balanced person, satisfied, in harmony with myself and others, patient, etc., etc. But am I this right now? No. I get angry and this and that, so I embrace myself, and with awareness and determination, I direct myself towards the result that I want to achieve. And why this is possible? Because we are interdependent beings based on causes and conditions. We are not static beings. We depend on causes and conditions that bring transformations. We interact, and by interacting, we transform ourselves. So this is the first sigil. Every composed phenomena are interdependent. So is this clear? Okay, the second is everything that is impure is of the nature of suffering. What does pure or impure mean? In this case, it means anything that is polluted by mental defilements, so egoism, anger, envy, jealousy, attachment, unsatisfaction,
ansia, paure, in fondo l'egoismo, questa
anxiousness, this obsession of self-gratification, and ignorance, to stay attached to a view of reality that is incoherent. So everything that is lived through this is polluted by this. It's like putting on glasses of anger. How would I look at the world? Through anger. And there's a very interesting point here that can make us reflect quite a bit. That is, a couple of days ago I was speaking with a friend, and he said, Lama, I'm talking to people in these days about the story you talked about when you were in Tibet and it was cold, and you asked to this kid if he was cold, living in this place that had a lot of openings, and he replied to you, yes, well, it's winter, so it's cold, obviously. And in summer, it's hot. So, and he said, look, since you told this story, I'm actually sleeping in a room that is right now at 30 degrees, and I'm not suffering anymore after I heard this story. In every moment of our life, like the present moment right now, we receive a lot of information. It's said, some studies say that in every second our brain receives 11 million bits of information Everything that we see, we listen, we touch, it's about all our senses. So we receive 11 million bits of information.
Riceviamo 11 milioni di informazioni. Il punto importante
The important point is
di quante informazioni siamo
how many of these informations are we aware of that we are aware in our conscious. Some say 10, some say between 10 and 50, and some say 2,000. But even if it were 2,000, it's 2,000 on 11 million. Or 50 on 11 million. So what happens with all the rest of this information? It stays in a subconscious level. And here there is a fundamental thing for our life, which is who determines which of these information come to our consciousness. Let's say we are here in the Gompa and we say, okay, we have here space for just 100 people. Because these numbers are, let's say, approximate, it's not. But, okay, let's say we can host here 100 people, but outside we have 11 million people waiting to come inside. Who is the responsible of choosing who comes inside and who stays out? This is called the This is called the ascending reticular system. And what does this system do? It's the part of our brain that says, this information, I bring it to my consciousness, and this, no. So it has a very important job, because the information that comes to our conscious is what then we define as our reality. So what determines who enters and who stays out? It's an order of priority, actually. Our physical needs. For example, if we are here, you're listening to me with attention, but then you need to really go to the restroom. And you stay here and you don't go to the restroom. The more time passes, the more the physical need increases, the more this takes space in our conscience. The more we will be completely absorbed by this. It happened to me some time ago. We were in the car, we were talking about something quite important, and then I really needed to pee. So at a certain point I needed to stop the car and go to the restroom, because otherwise I would not be able to focus on the conversation. So our physical needs are the first that take place. Then the emotions. For example, if I'm feeling anger, this anger determines who enters and who stays out. So which parts of reality will I put emphasis to? The things that are going well, or things that are going bad in my life? The things that are going poorly, badly. If I'm sad, what do I bring to the surface? The joyous things or the bad things? And if I am joyous, it's the opposite. So if I'm living something as a menace, when I'm under menace, this takes a huge part, comes to my conscience, everything that is connected to this menace in order to counteract it. So if it's summer and I keep complaining that it's hot and I see the weather as a menace, of the 11 million bits of information, I will give importance only to that. Let's say that out of 50, maybe 30 or 40, I will put importance on the weather, because I'm living it as a menace. If I stop living it as a menace, but as a fact, then slowly, it will become part of the 11 million bits that I'm not giving a lot of importance to. So I will have space for something else. So what happens is we live our world through the filter of ourselves. And if this filter is made of hate or fear, etc., as a result, we suffer.
Crediamo di soffrire per 3 ragioni.
We think we suffer for 3 reasons, normally. Usually we think we suffer because, first of all, we cannot have what we want. 2, we have to live what we don't want to live. And 3, we want to separate from the things we like. When I'm saying this is not only about material things, but also situations and people, that reality is not as, for me, as I think it should be. When I have to leave something that I don't like, it's about every situation around me. And when I need to separate from good things, it's impermanence. But try to see for a moment your sufferings and see if there is some suffering that ends up in a category that is outside from one of these 3 that we just said. It's difficult. Usually, the reasons we think we suffer is because this is like this, that is like that, because I cannot have this, because that should be like that, but it's not, because there is something good that I have to part from. So what happens is that we think we suffer from this, but Buddha explains in this second sigil is that this is actually not true. The reason that we suffer is not because the external conditions are not good, but because we have a way of relating to these external conditions that is not healthy. So everything that is polluted by our ignorance, egoism, envy, jealousy, attachment, etc., is lived with suffering. It's like when I ask to the kids, have you ever seen an adult that's complaining because of work? And the answer is yes. Have you ever seen this adult going on vacation and getting stressed on vacation? And they say yes. So the question is it because vacations are stressing or because the adult is stressed? And everybody gave the same answer, because the adult is stressed.
Se io non cambio gli occhiali che ho addosso,
if I don't change my glasses, my filters, I will continue living the world through this. And this does not mean that external reality does not exist or doesn't have value. It has value. It's obvious that if I am hungry, it will be more difficult for me to be happy. If I live under external menaces, I will not be happy. Of course, if someone is in a war and is being bombed, we are not saying, no, but actually you're suffering because of your mental defilements. Of course, but what creates more suffering is not the bomb that kills, that is terrible, but it's everything that comes as a consequence. The hate that is there, the sadness, the traumas that remains there from generation to generation. Okay? So, I don't want to minimize the external conflict, suffering. Buddha says that we have 4 kinds of needs. We have physical needs of eating, of having a certain body temperature, of rest. So physical needs are important. If those needs are not satisfied, Everything else is, don't even look at it because it will not work. Then we need emotional needs. We need to be loved, we need to love, we need to have faith and receive faith. We need to feel safe. If we are in a context where we feel under menace, we will not feel good, and our space will all be consumed by it, whether it is an external menace or an internal menace, because we have a lot of ghosts in our minds with internal menaces, that is. And then we have the spiritual needs. We need to give meaning to life, because when materially I have everything I need, when I have an emotional kind of stability, I have a safe context, but I don't have a sense, a meaning in life, then it creates kind of a hole, a emptiness in our life. So this is, the point is not to live life as an end in itself, but as a means to an end. But if I find myself in a moment where I have a physical need, but internally I have stability, I will live it completely different. For example, Genlakpala, when I asked him what was your most beautiful moment of your life when you left for Tibet, and I imagined he would say the last years of his life, but actually he said the first 10 years. And I said, what? Because I knew that the first 10 years he was in a place called Baksa in north of India that was a former prison where all the monks were taken in 59, like kind of 10,000 monks. And in that moment, what happened is that 80% of them had TBC, so they were unhealthy. They were not used to the heat. So when Tibetans arrived in India and felt heat, they thought they had fever, and so they started actually to cover even more up. And they did not have good food. They had really, really poor and bad food. They did not have a bed to sleep in. They would simply lay down, and that's it. And this did not last just a couple of days. They did not even have security and safety, because they left their homes and did not even have a vision of the future. So it was kind of a very complex situation. So why was it his most beautiful years? And he said, because during those 10 years, me and the people around me were only thinking about two things: the situation in Tibet, but principally we were thinking of the practice, the Dharma practice. We were studying Dharma, we were debating, we were doing meditations, retreats. Our life was just spiritual practice, and that's it. We were not worrying about material things because we had nothing. We were not debating on what's mine or yours because there was no such thing. And then after some years, we had more resources, and then we started debating on my house, your house, and then the spiritual part more and more became less intense. So those years, the first years, were more joyous years because he was able to live those years in this way. He was able to give more importance to the spiritual part rather than the physical and material aspect. If we give priority to the physical and material aspect until I will not fulfill those needs, I will not be happy. But if I have an internal stability, even if I don't have these needs covered, I will be happy. What I'm trying to say with this is that even the external reality completely changes based on how we live it. Okay? The second sigil is our internal state is not a result of the external world, but is the way in which we are inside that determines the way we live the world around us. So the internal state that determines our choices, our actions, and consequently changes the world around us. We can look at wars, for example. What causes wars? External conditions like lack of resources, or internal conditions like extreme egoism? One of the most important texts of the UNESCO that says something like, wars are created in the minds of human beings, and it's there that we need to address them.
Quando noi prendiamo questo e lo adattiamo alla nostra vita di tutti,
So when we adapt this to our everyday life, we suffer, we are unsatisfied, we have a lot of problems and conflicts. I don't think anybody here, starting from myself, that would say, oh, no, everything is perfect in my life. But if we look, the best way to go through it is not to change the world around us, but how we relate with the world around us that consequently will change the world that we live in. And sometimes this is seen as being passive, but it's not a passive attitude towards the world. It's not saying, but it's already like this, so what can I do? No. We say, okay, let's start from how I'm living it internally in order to change everything else. So, if we look, there are many different kinds of violences that the real way of changing it is changing the way we narrate them. For example, where we see a sense of superiority that brings to violence, it's only by eliminating the sense of superiority that we can eliminate violence. For example, slavery. Why were we able to defeat slavery? Of course, there were some laws, and this and that in a practical level. But what brought to this practical laws to abolish slavery? A change in the vision. For example, there are certain places where they have laws where they recognize emotional needs, psychological needs of animals. And this is kind of revolutionary, because the way in which many animals are kept, it's like being held in captivity in prisons. Imagine if you have animals, imagine your dog or cat being kept like this, in this way. But in order to change this, we need a different vision. What I want to say with this is that the reality we live in is determined principally by what we have inside of us and not the external conditions that are the result of our internal view, So everything that is impure, so not in the sense of intrinsically, but what is polluted by anger, jealousy, envy, etc., is transformed in suffering. Is it clear? So the solution is changing our internal attitude, so cultivating love, gratitude instead of unsatisfaction, rejoicing instead of criticizing, developing concentration instead of distracting ourselves, etc., etc. Third sigil. Is it clear, the second? And this changes the way we live life. The third sigil. Every phenomena is empty and lack intrinsic existence. We could spend days talking about this, but let's go directly to the point.
Quando vediamo una persona,
When we look at someone, for example, do you see me right now?
chiudete gli occhi un secondo.
Close your eyes for one moment. Before opening your eyes, think by yourselves, who will you see? Who will you see when you will open again your eyes?
La stessa persona o uno diverso?
Do you imagine of seeing the same person or someone different? What do you think without
La stessa persona, apriamo gli occhi, mi vedete.
thinking in a philosophy way? But okay, so you open your eyes, you look at me, right?
E se pensate
I am
di
the same.
vedermi fra una settimana,
And if you think of seeing me in a week, do you think of seeing the same person or someone different?
stessa persona.
The same person.
Faccio un esempio.
I will make an example with this napkin.
Ok, riuscite a vedere questo fazzoletto?
Can you see this napkin?
Chiaro? Ok, colore?
Which color is it? Green? No. Red? Yes. Okay. The shape,
Quadrato, tutti i lati uguali?
every side, is it the same or different?
C'è questo che è stato tagliato un po' così, ok?
This side is a bit different.
Possiamo
Now,
immaginare quel fazzoletto?
can you imagine this napkin? Is it the same?
Senza filosofare,
Without thinking too much. Is it the same? Yes. Okay. And now,
Quanto tempo possiamo stare qua?
how we can spend here
Tutto il giorno,
all the day. Is the same napkin, right? Okay.
E adesso?
And now,
Cosa è cambiato?
what changed?
Quello che è successo è il seguente.
What changed? What happened is the following. At this moment,
Vedete il fazzoletto tutto fatto in quanti pezzi abbiamo?
you see this napkin in 4 pieces.
Riusciamo ancora ad accedere all'immagine mentale
Can we
della prima
access the mental image of the first time I showed you the napkin?
volta? Cosa vuol dire?
Yes. Okay, so what happened is that the first time I showed you the napkin, that mental image
Ancora essere sostenuto
was being still sustained by the object. So we were saying that it did not change, even though some changes were happening. When the changes were
tenere quell'immagine mentale
so big that
nuova immagine mentale.
it changed that mental image that we had previously, then we said that the object changed. For example,
Accedere a tutte le due immagini.
now can we access both mental images of the napkins? Yes.
Perciò noi
So we relate
con il mondo
to
impermanente
the impermanent world that is constantly transforming through mental images,
termine tecnico significati generalizzati.
which is generalized meanings.
Relazioniamo
We
tramite quello.
relate
E questo
through
che cosa
these.
succede? Quando uno vede
So
l'altro e crede che una settimana
when
dopo
I
vedrà la
look
stessa
at
persona,
another person and I think would see the same person,
o è cambiato?
actually the person
Interazione c'è?
changed or no?
Quanto si
We,
interagisce
as we
in una
said,
settimana?
when we interact, we transform. So how much do we change in a week? There are a lot of interactions, so we transform kind of a lot. But even in a few minutes, this transformation occurs. So reality is impermanent, but it appears to us as if it were impermanent or permanent.
Io ti vedo, credo di vedere la stessa persona.
I see you and I
Appare come essendo
see you after a week,
o come se fossi statico.
and you appear to me as you
Statico.
are static or changed. Static. So this is a form of ignorance.
Appare a noi come se fosse.
So reality appears to us as if it was permanent, and we relate to this impermanent reality as if it were permanent.
Quindi rimaniamo male quando vediamo.
So we become sad when we see someone that has changed or has become older, or we have some difficulty accepting death, etc. So the impermanent reality is empty of a permanent existence. In other words, is not permanent.
Facciamo un altro esempio.
Let's make another example. I play.
Riuscite a sentire, no? Ok.
The Tibetan bowl. And if you ask to the person sitting next to you, did you hear this sound? They would say yes. But when we are asking this question, what we are really asking is, did you hear the same sound that I hear? Are you seeing the same person that I'm seeing? If you say, are you seeing Lama? Yes, but which Lama are we talking about? The one that I'm seeing, because when we ask this question is, are you hearing the same sound that we are hearing too? Without thinking too much, the answer would be yes, of course. How many singing bowls are there? But if we start thinking a bit more, and what is sound? Sound is vibration in the air. This vibration with different waves arrive to our ear, the hearing, that perceive this wave, that send the signal to our brain, and our brain kind of searches based on our experience a similar experience, so we associate it to the singing bowl, and so then we can make this match. When you look at me, what arrives to your eyes are waves of light, because light is touching me, and based on the material of my skin and my clothes, etc., those rays, those frequencies of light are absorbed and reflected, and those that are reflected go back to your eyes, making the difference between colors and forms, etc., because some materials absorb and reflect in different ways, creating colors, because colors are in our eyes, not actually in the object, so reflects, and what arrives to our eyes, colors and forms. These differences create forms. We send that information to our brain that researches of all our experiences and concepts, and we then arrive to the conclusion, I'm seeing this. Both with the singing bowl and the object that we see, the sensory object that arrives to each of us, is the same or is it different? I'm very close to the singing bowl, or I'm seeing Giovanni, for example, at the end of the Gompa. The sound, the waves that arrive to me and him are the same or different? Different. And what is similar, by definition, is different. So the hearing of each of us, is it same or is it different? It's different. The importance that we give to the sound is the same or different? Different. The value that we attribute to that sound is the same or is it different? The emotion connected to that sound, the emotion that that sound can evoke inside of us, is the same or different? Different. So I'm singing this bowl. Are you listening? Are you hearing the same thing that I'm hearing? No. Not because I'm special. None of us are hearing the same thing. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? No. And this is the same for each and every one of us. So you're hearing the same thing of me. I'm hearing a sound, yes, but I'm not hearing what you are hearing. Are you seeing Lama? I am seeing my version of Lama, not yours. So what happens is that we live in a reality that is subjective. But this reality appears to us as if it were subjective or objective. It appears to us as if it were objective, and we relate to it. as if it were objective. So this is another form of ignorance. So so the subjective reality is empty of objectiveness, is empty of objective existence. So why do we need to negate? Because we have the tendency of affirming. Every phenomena is empty. What does it mean? Nothing exists in an autonomous, independent, objective way as it appears to us. Why? Because everything exists in a relational way, an interdependent way, subjective. Okay? So it's not possible identifying anything in an autonomous, independent way. So everything exists in a relational way. Nothing exists in an autonomous way, but it appears to us as if it existed in an autonomous way. So every phenomena, including myself, are empty of an autonomous existence, and we don't have self-existence. They exist as they are within a complex web of interdependence. Without entering into too much detail, but this is one of the main points of the Buddhist worldview. We live in a subjective, relational, interdependent reality, and not in an objective, autonomous, independent reality, not intrinsic. Nothing has intrinsic characteristic. Everything has characteristics based on the complex equation that is made from parts that are made of other complex relations. There is a book called Helgoland by Carlo Rovelli, is a physic, that exactly explains this in a very clear way. If you like quantum physics or physics in general, this is very interesting, but also other books of Nagarjuna and other masters, very beautiful books. But what happens is I see myself as if I existed in an autonomous, independent, objective way, so separated from everything else. Everything for me exists in an autonomous, independent way, and this brings as a consequence to an obsession of self-gratification. So I live myself as the most important thing or being that ever existed or will ever exist in the universe or multiverse. This is what happens. This derives from our inability to see how everything is interconnected. But nothing exists independently from a web of relations. So if we think of a macro level, everything is connected, but this does not mean that everything is one. So why do we suffer? Because we act in an incoherent way, we cultivate things that are not good, we don't take care of what is good for us. This comes from our extreme attachment and jealousy and hate, ignorance, that comes from our egoism and obsession of self-gratification, that if we simply put this out of the equation, the world would completely be different, and this comes from an attachment to reality as if it existed in an autonomous way as it appears to us. Maybe I created more confusion to some of you, but what happens is we live in a reality that is relational and interdependent, subjective, even though it appears to us as is objective. When we get angry, this anger exists on the basis that the person or situation or object of anger, as if
È solo possibile che ci sia rabbia dal momento in cui l'oggetto di rabbia sorge e viene vissuto come se esistesse in un modo
It existed in an autonomous and independent way as an object of anger. But if I realize that the object of anger, in reality, I'm living it like this because I'm attributing this value to this object, but it's not intrinsically an object of anger, then anger would not be sustained anymore.
Perciò nel sentiero
So in the Buddhist path, one of the fundamental points is to gradually understand how ourselves and the world around us are interdependent, are relational, and not in an autonomous, independent, and objective way. And we could spend years talking about this, but in a few words, this is it. The fourth sigil, that is fundamental, and it's the easiest to explain. It can be both complex and easy, but is one of the most important. Of course, every one of these points are important. It's beyond suffering, there is peace. That means every one of us, without exceptions, we have the ability and the possibility of creating a positive interdependence and interact in a healthy way to gradually get out of suffering and reach peace called nirvana. It does not exist anybody that doesn't have this ability, even the ant. I don't know why they use in the scriptures this example of the ant, but even the ant, if she puts force, effort in the correct direction, she will reach enlightenment, a state of Buddha. Every one of us, without exception, when we create positive and healthy interactions, slowly, we learn how to become more healthy. And we are able to develop more our qualities, and because we are impermanent and because we interact, it's exactly because of our suffering is not dependent on an external reality but an internal one, and is exactly because nothing exists in an autonomous intrinsic way but it is interdependent, that it is possible to get out of suffering. Because someone could say, but I am egoist. Are we egoists? Yes. In the sense, our priority is I and mine, not the us. So, already starting by this, we can understand a lot. So, we are egoists. We are ignorant. A subjective reality appears to us as if it were objective. We relate to what is impermanent as if it was permanent. We are ignorant. We have anger, jealousy, and etc. Yes. But are we like this in an autonomous, independent way, or are we relational beings? We relate, and every time there is interaction, we transform. So, do we have free will, or do we have conscience, and so consequently we have free will? We have a conscience, so we have the ability of directing our thoughts and our actions, and consequently our interactions. We don't exist as suffering egoists, being in a autonomous and independent way. We have egoists, etc., within a complex interdependence in a relational way. So this means that when I start changing some parts, everything else starts changing as well. So this means that I can change the result of the equation of who I am by slowly changing the parts that it is made of. And this is why we are able to become Buddhas. Me, as every one of us, have this ability. In Buddha's time, Buddha had some disciples that were people that were kind of bad, let's say. Let's use this terminology, even if it's not correct. For example, this disciple of Nguni he killed 999 people because at a certain point his parents were dead, and he received this information that his parents went to this kind of hell, and the only way of saving his parents, to which he was very attached, was to kill 1,000 people, offering them as a sort of sacrifice to a certain divinity. And so he followed this path and became an assassin, and everybody was so afraid of him, and he was called the person of the garland of fingers, because he made this kind of necklace of fingers of all the people he killed. So he killed 999 people, and at a certain point he was in the bushes and he saw Buddha, and he said, he will be the last one, so I will finish this cycle. He went towards Buddha to kill him, and the story says that he was running, and Buddha was walking very slowly, but he was not able to reach him. And then he became very angry, and he shouted, "Stop! I'm tired of running." And Buddha said, "Actually, I am still. You are the one that keeps running, meaning I am out of the cycle of suffering. You are still in it." But anyways, Buddha was able to embrace this assassin, and he was able to open his heart, and Buddha embraced him and helped him to understand that his action would not help him to reach his goal, and he resented his action and wanted to change and became a disciple of Buddha. And within one lifetime, he was actually then able to reach the state of nirvana. So this is an example of a person that did the worst, and even though had these actions, made this action, was able to reach a state of peace. So it is said that he was able to die in peace, even though his death was not kind of peaceful, in the sense that he went in a city to beg for food, and the people that recognized him then killed him because of his previous actions. But he was not in anger towards those people, and was able to reach a state of peace, inner peace, and so he was able to die with this inner peace, with no resentment. So this is a story. I don't know here if someone killed here 999 people, but if this is the case, you still have some possibility. But the point is, even if you killed one person, there is still an opportunity. But anyways, without joking now, the point is, there is no one that cannot be able to reach this kind of state. Everybody have the opportunity. If we decide to walk in a coherent direction, we can reach any result we put our minds to. Why? Because we are interdependent, and so if we want a healthy lifestyle, and we act coherently, then we will reach that result. Of course, then we will have to confront ourselves with the causes that we created in the past. So we are not free from the consequences of our actions. So the last sigil is the basis of the Buddha's teachings, is the faith that Buddha has and that he transmitted from generation to generation, that the faith that he has on all of us, that we are all able to reach this state of nirvana and go beyond the state of suffering. So the fundamental point in these four sigils are to trust in a coherent worldview based on our actions, comprehend that our suffering is not based on external conditions, but on internal conditions that then create external conditions, that we live in an interdependent and relational and subjective reality and not objective as it appears to us, and that the fourth point is to have a profound faith in ourselves. I am able to reach this state of peace, and I can learn to live in peace within myself and with others. So having self-esteem and faith in us, in ourselves. These are the four bases of Buddhist worldview. And honestly, I don't really care if we want to define ourselves as Buddhist or no. We are not here in order to create a world of Buddhists. We are here in order to make our own part, in order to have more consciousness and have less hate and have more love. And if we think about it, how would our life be if we would be able to follow these four sigils? It would be completely different, right? If we would be able to see what is impermanent as impermanent, if we would stop to be young forever, if we started to accept the fact that once something is born, is already dying. The problem is not that something ends. The problem is when we live things in a bad way and so they transform in a bad way. The problem is not to die. The problem is to live badly. The problem is not that a relationship ends, but how we live badly the relationship and then create suffering to one another. So in the awareness of impermanence, I live the present with more awareness. I am more aware of my actions and I stop to victimize myself. I stop pointing fingers to one or the other. I embrace myself and I direct myself to where I want to arrive to. I don't impose to myself or others who I need or you need to be. I need to embrace you for who you are, and at the best of my ability, I guide you in order for you to become the best version of yourself. I don't impose to you who you should already be, but I try to help you to become something better. The same for our society, for our planet, etc. I don't like war, so I need to live my everyday life in a coherent way with the world of peace that I would like to live in. The reality that exists is what it is, but I walk in the direction that I want to. Then I stop victimizing myself, putting the blame on the world, on the traumas, on my internal scars. And so by this means, when someone asks us, what do you do in your life? Personally, I would answer, I put a lot of energy to love myself, love others, having a coherent view of reality. No, but I mean at work. Oh, okay, at work, I have to be a lama. To another needs to be a dentist or whatever. But what do you do in life? No, in life, I cultivate love towards myself, towards others, cultivating a coherent view of reality. In life, what I want is to develop patience and love. This is what I do in life. Then, for my subsistence, I need to do this, and that. But the priority changes with the second sigil. With the third, we allow ourselves to see the world in a wider and more profound way, and we get out of this self-centered worldview and we go more to the root of the conflicts. And the last one is the one that allows us to walk, because it allows us to develop self-esteem and faith towards ourselves. So in Tibetan, it says all composed phenomena, so that interact, are impermanent. Everything that is impure is of nature of suffering. All phenomena are empty of intrinsic existence. And beyond suffering, there is peace. And this is the basis of the Buddhist view in general. So I invite you to reflect on what we said, what is coherent, what you think it's not coherent, and what you feel it's coherent. Please remember it and try to redirect your life having a worldview that is coherent, that can bring us to a state where we feel better and happier, where we can influence our own world in a better way. So this is all. I thank you. I remind you that today we have the Yamantaka mandala. Usually when the sand mandala is being done is more artistic, let's say, but in this case it's part of a practice. So there's all the part of the ritual, the visualizations, etc. And this is being done because then this mandala is the basis for the meditation that we will do in the next days. That it's called the practice of Rabnechemo, and at the end of it will be dissolved. We have quite a few places in the West, but also in the East, where this is being done. So we have a very unique opportunity to get closer to this. So I thank you all. Now let's do our final dedications.
Losan tempe drume sasum ki drove munsela takto ne gyur chi nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan dele kshin ninse kuncho sumki chingi loba kuncho sumki ngodrubot sol Concio sumche trascescio. All'alba o al tramonto, di notte o durante il giorno, possano i tre gioielli concederci le loro benedizioni, possano aiutarci ad ottenere tutte le realizzazioni e cospargere il sentiero della nostra vita con molti segni di buon auspicio. Grazie a tutti, buon appetito. Chi vuole venire per un saluto veloce, benvenuto.